My name is Charlotte, and I'm 35 years old. I'm standing in my new downtown penthouse looking at the Seattle skyline, thinking about how 15 years of marriage just crumbled in the most unexpected way. 3 weeks ago, I returned from a business trip to find my mother-in-law had changed the locks on my own house, the house I'd been paying for. She stood there with that cold smile and told me this was now a family home and I wasn't welcome anymore. What she didn't know was that I'd been secretly paying for everything in her life for 15 years. Before I share what happened when she discovered the truth, let me know where you're watching from. Please subscribe if you believe in karma and justice in family relationships, and hit that notification bell because what happened next will absolutely blow your mind. I first met Michael at a software company in Seattle back in 2009. I was 24, fresh out of MIT, with a computer science degree working as a developer at Amazon. Michael worked in the marketing department and his charm was undeniable. He had this way of making everyone feel special, always remembering little details about people's lives. We started dating after 3 months of flirting over coffee breaks and late-night project sessions. 6 months into our relationship, I met his family for the first time at Thanksgiving dinner. His father, Frank, was a construction foreman, tough, but kind with hands that showed years of hard work. Dorothy, his mother, was a different story. She was perfectly polite on the surface, but I caught the way she looked at my designer handbag, the way she commented on my car being too flashy for someone so young. Brian, Michael's younger brother, was 22, and in his 3rd year of medical school at the University of Washington. Everything changed 1 month after that dinner. Frank had a terrible accident at the construction site. A beam fell and crushed his leg, leaving him unable to work. The insurance company found a loophole to deny most of the claims, saying he hadn't been wearing proper safety equipment, though Frank swore he had been. Suddenly, this proud, hard-working family was drowning in medical bills. Michael came to me in tears one night in January 2010. He said his mother was working 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and stocking shelves during the day, just to keep up with the mortgage. Brian was considering dropping out of medical school because they couldn't afford the tuition anymore. My heart broke seeing the man I loved so devastated. I was making $160,000 a year at Amazon with stock options and bonuses on top. I'd been smart with my money, investing early in tech stocks and keeping my expenses low. Without telling Michael, I went to see Dorothy one day when I knew she'd be home alone. I told her I wanted to help, but she refused immediately, saying they didn't take charity. So I got creative. I set up an anonymous wire transfer system through a shell company I created, making it look like it was coming from a disability insurance payout. $5,000 appeared in Dorothy's account every month like clockwork. When she mentioned it to Michael, wondering if Frank's lawyer had finally gotten somewhere with the insurance company, he assumed it must be true. But that was just the beginning. When Brian's tuition bill came due, $45,000 suddenly got paid by a mysterious scholarship foundation. When Dorothy's car broke down, she won a raffle she didn't remember entering, and a new Honda Accord was delivered to her driveway. When the roof started leaking, a home improvement company showed up saying they were doing free work in the neighborhood as part of a promotional campaign. I kept meticulous records in a private bank account separate from anything Michael could see. I took on freelance coding projects at night, sometimes working until 3 in the morning to make sure our joint savings never showed any suspicious decreases. Michael thought I was just passionate about coding, staying up late for the love of the craft. By the time we got married in September 2011, I was fully supporting 2 households without anyone knowing. The wedding was beautiful but modest, just family and close friends at a garden venue in Bellevue. Dorothy made several comments about how Jennifer, Michael's ex-girlfriend, had always dreamed of a grand cathedral wedding, but I let it slide. I was too happy to care about her passive-aggressive comments. What I didn't let slide was continuing to take care of the family that clearly needed help. Every month I made sure Frank's medical treatments were covered. When he needed physical therapy 3 times a week, I arranged for the best therapist in Seattle to treat him pro bono, supposedly through a veterans program, even though Frank had never served. When Dorothy's root canal became infected and needed emergency surgery, The dental office suddenly discovered she had coverage through a program for families of construction workers. The elaborate deception required constant vigilance. I had spreadsheets tracking every payment, every story, every supposed source of the money. I became an expert at creating believable scenarios. The mortgage assistance came from a government program for families affected by workplace accidents. The grocery store gift cards that appeared in Dorothy's mailbox every week were from a local church outreach program. The payment for Brian's medical school loans was from an alumni donation fund. Michael never questioned why we couldn't seem to save as much as my salary should allow. I always had explanations ready about market downturns, investment opportunities that required patience, or unexpected expenses that I handled so he wouldn't worry. He trusted me completely with our finances, happy to let me manage everything while he focused on his marketing career. The first 5 years of our marriage tested every ounce of my patience and compassion. In 2012, when Emma was born, I thought Dorothy would soften toward me. I was wrong. She criticized everything from how I held the baby to my decision to pump breast milk so I could return to work. She told anyone who would listen that Jennifer would have been a stay-at-home mother completely devoted to her children. I continued paying the mortgage on Frank and Dorothy's house $3,200 every month through what I told them was a special assistance program for families affected by construction accidents. Dorothy never questioned it, just accepted it as their due. When she mentioned it at family gatherings talking about how the government finally did something right, I kept my mouth shut and smiled. 2014 brought Noah, our second child, and even more criticism. Dorothy said I was making a mistake having children so close together while working such demanding hours. She conveniently forgot that her constant financial needs were one reason I couldn't reduce my work schedule. By then I'd been promoted to senior architect, making $220,000 a year, but nearly half of it went to supporting Michael's family. The most painful part was watching Dorothy take credit for things I'd provided. When Brian graduated from medical school in 2015, she threw a huge party and gave a speech about how her sacrifices and hard work had made it possible. She talked about the extra shifts she'd pulled, the meals she'd skipped, never mentioning the mysterious scholarship that had paid for everything. I sat there holding baby Noah, while Emma played at my feet, listening to everyone praise Dorothy's devotion to her children. Brian's wedding that same year cost $50,000. His fiancée Patricia came from money and expected a certain level of celebration. Dorothy came to Michael in tears saying she couldn't give Brian the wedding he deserved. That night, Michael was so stressed he couldn't sleep. The next day, Dorothy miraculously discovered that Frank's old union had a wedding fund for children of injured workers. The relief on Michael's face was worth the freelance work I did for 3 months straight to cover it. But Dorothy's behavior toward me grew worse with each passing year. At Christmas 2016, she gave everyone handmade quilts except me. I got a $10 gift card to Starbucks. When Emma asked why Mommy's present was so small, Dorothy said some people were just harder to shop for. Michael didn't even notice. She would make comments about my parenting in front of the entire family. Once at Easter dinner, she announced that Emma seemed anxious and suggested it was because I worked too much. Another time, she told everyone that Noah's speech delay, which was actually completely normal according to his pediatrician, was probably due to being in daycare instead of home with his mother. Michael would occasionally tell her to ease up, but never with any real conviction. The financial drain was becoming harder to hide. In 2017, when Brian and Patricia wanted to buy a house, Dorothy came to me directly for the first time. She said she knew I had money and that family helped family. When I suggested they could get a loan like everyone else, she went to Michael crying about how cold and selfish I was. To keep the peace, I secretly provided the $100,000 down payment through another elaborate scheme involving a supposed inheritance from a great-aunt Patricia never knew existed. I started seeing a therapist to deal with the stress. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that I was enabling the family's dependency while sacrificing my own well-being. But every time I thought about stopping the payments, I remembered Frank's genuine kindness to our children, Brian's gratitude, even if misdirected, and most of all, Michael's relief that his family was taken care of. I convinced myself I was doing it for love. 2018 brought a new challenge when Dorothy's sister Grace got divorced and needed a place to stay. Dorothy volunteered Michael and me to help without asking. Suddenly, we were paying for Grace's apartment, her car insurance, and her daughter's college tuition. Michael thought his mother was using her savings to help her sister. In reality, Dorothy was forwarding my money to Grace while taking credit for the generosity. By 2019, I was the youngest chief technology officer in my company's history, making $350,000 a year plus stock options. To the outside world, we were a successful power couple. Inside, I was drowning in secrets and resentment. I was supporting 8 adults and funding 3 college educations, while Dorothy continued to treat me like an unwelcome intruder in the family. The pandemic in 2020 actually provided some relief. With everyone isolated, I didn't have to face Dorothy's constant criticism, but the financial needs increased. Frank's health deteriorated, requiring expensive treatments. Brian's practice struggled with reduced patients. Grace lost her job. The monthly outflow increased to $15,000, all hidden, all bearing the weight of increasingly elaborate lies about government programs, insurance payouts, and charitable organizations. Michael started questioning our finances more seriously in 2021. He couldn't understand why we didn't have more savings with my salary. I created fake investment portfolios showing long-term holdings that couldn't be liquidated without penalties. I showed him charity donations that were actually payments to his family. The web of lies grew so complex, I needed spreadsheets just to keep my story straight. 2022 brought the biggest challenge yet. Dorothy decided she wanted to renovate her kitchen, a $50,000 project. She had already told everyone about the amazing contractor she'd found and how the kitchen would be perfect for hosting family gatherings. When the contractor demanded payment, she came to Michael in tears saying she'd misunderstood the payment terms. I watched my husband age 5 years in that conversation, stressed about his mother's situation. That night, I arranged for another miraculous solution, a home improvement grant for families of injured workers that covered exactly the amount needed. By 2023, the toll on my mental health was severe. I was taking anxiety medications, seeing my therapist twice a week, and barely sleeping. Emma, now 11, asked me once why Grandma Dorothy didn't like her mother. I couldn't answer without crying. Noah, 9, had started noticing too, asking why we never got invited to Grandma's special family meetings that Uncle Brian and Aunt Patricia attended. The accumulated total I'd spent on Michael's family over the years exceeded $2 million. This included mortgage payments, medical bills, tuition cars, home repairs, weddings, business support for Brian's practice, and countless other expenses. All of it hidden, all of it unacknowledged, all of it while being treated as less than family. Everything changed in March 2024 when I was promoted again, this time to Chief Executive of Technology for the entire Pacific Northwest Division. The position required me to fly to Singapore for a 2-week intensive leadership summit. It was the opportunity of a lifetime working with tech leaders from around the world to shape the future of our industry. The week before I left, Dorothy called with another crisis. Her kitchen, the one I'd secretly paid to renovate just 2 years earlier, now needed new appliances. The refrigerator had died, the stove was acting up, and the dishwasher was leaking. She needed $20,000 immediately for top-of-the-line replacements. When I suggested perhaps getting standard appliances instead of luxury ones, she went on a tirade about how I didn't understand the value of quality, how Jennifer would have understood, and how some people just weren't raised to appreciate nice things. I transferred the money that night, exhausted from the conversation, and dreading the trip because I knew something would go wrong while I was gone. Michael promised to handle everything with the kids, swearing his mother would help out. I left for Singapore on March 15th with a heavy heart, but hoping the distance would give me clarity about my situation. The summit was incredible. For the first time in years, I felt valued and respected. My ideas were heard, my expertise was sought after, and nobody questioned whether I deserved to be there. I gave a presentation on blockchain integration that received a standing ovation. Tech leaders from Google and Microsoft approached me about potential collaborations. I remembered who I was beyond being the unwelcome daughter-in-law and secret benefactor. On the fourth day, I received a strange notification from my bank about unusual activity on my account. Several large purchases had been made on the credit card I'd left for emergencies. When I checked the details, I found charges for furniture electronics and multiple restaurant bills totaling over $8,000. I called Michael immediately, but he didn't answer. It was 3 in the morning in Seattle, so I tried to stay calm and wait. The next morning, Singapore time, I finally reached Emma on her iPad. She was crying, barely able to speak through her sobs. She told me Grandma Dorothy had moved some people into our house and they were sleeping in my office. Aunt Grace was back along with her new boyfriend Tom and his 2 teenage sons. Dorothy had told Emma and Noah that this was now their real family and Mom needed to learn to share better. I tried calling Michael again, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I called Dorothy's number and Grace answered laughing. She told me Dorothy was busy redecorating my office to make it more suitable for Tom's boys. When I demanded to speak to Dorothy, she came on the line with that fake sweet voice she used when she wanted something. She explained that family takes care of family, and since I was never home anyway, it made sense for Grace and her new family to use the space. She said the children needed male role models since their father was always working and their mother was gallivanting around the world. She actually used the word gallivanting as if my business trip was some kind of vacation. I told her to get them out immediately, but she laughed and said Michael had already agreed. She said it was his house too and he had the right to help his family. Then she added something that chilled me to the bone. She said she'd been thinking about the living situation and realized it wasn't working out with me being gone so much. Maybe it would be better if I found my own place when I got back somewhere closer to the airport, since I traveled so much. I hung up and immediately called my lawyer Jennifer Huang, who'd helped with my contracts over the years. I explained the situation, and she advised me to document everything and come back immediately. I booked a flight for that night, leaving the summit early despite the professional consequences. My colleagues were understanding when I explained there was a family emergency. The flight home felt like the longest 20 hours of my life. I tried reaching Michael repeatedly, sent him dozens of texts, even emailed his work account. Nothing. Emma texted me that Daddy had been sleeping at the office because the house was too crowded. Noah sent a voice message saying he missed me and didn't like the new people in our house. My children were suffering while I was paying for everyone else's comfort. I landed at SeaTac Airport at 5:30 in the morning on March 20th. I took an Uber directly to our house in Bellevue, my heart pounding the entire ride. The house I'd paid the mortgage on for 7 years. The house where my children were supposed to feel safe. The house that represented everything I'd worked for. When I tried my key in the front door, it wouldn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe I was just exhausted and doing it wrong. But no, the lock had been changed. On my own house. I rang the doorbell, and after several minutes, Dorothy appeared in her robe looking annoyed at being woken up. The moment Dorothy opened that door will be burned in my memory forever. She stood there with a cold smile blocking the entrance to my own home. Behind her, I could see Grace lounging on my couch, drinking coffee from my favorite mug, the one Emma had made me for Mother's Day. 2 teenage boys I'd never seen before were eating breakfast at my dining table, and a strange man, presumably Tom, was walking around in his boxers like he owned the place. Dorothy spoke first, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is a family home now, Charlotte. We've discussed it, and we think it's best if you find alternative arrangements. The children are fine. They're adapting to having a real family environment for once." I pushed past her, ignoring her protests, and called for Emma and Noah. They came running from upstairs, still in their pajamas, and threw themselves into my arms. Emma was crying again, whispering that she wanted to come with me. Noah held on so tight I could barely breathe. Dorothy actually tried to pull them away, saying I was upsetting them with my dramatics. Grace stood up, then still holding my mug, and had the audacity to lecture me about selfishness. She said I had this big house with 5 bedrooms, while she'd been struggling in a tiny apartment, barely making ends meet. She said family was supposed to share, and it was time I learned that lesson. Tom nodded along this stranger in my house, agreeing that I needed to be more generous. I told them all to get out immediately, that this was my house paid for with my money. Dorothy actually laughed, and said Michael's name was on the deed too, and he'd already agreed to this arrangement. She said I could take it up with him when he got home from work, but for now I was trespassing if I didn't leave voluntarily. I tried calling Michael again right there in front of everyone. This time he answered, his voice weak and distant. He said he was at the office and couldn't talk, but that his mother had made some good points about family needing to stick together. He actually said those words to me, the woman who'd been secretly supporting his entire family for 15 years. He suggested I stay at a hotel for a few days while things cooled down, and we could discuss it rationally later. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I looked at my children, at their confused and frightened faces, and knew I had to be strong for them. I told them to pack bags, that we were going on an adventure. Dorothy immediately said the children were staying put, that she'd already enrolled them in spring break camp nearby, and I was being disruptive. I called the police, hoping they could help me get my children and some belongings. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. I explained the situation, showed them my driver's license with this address, and told them I'd been locked out of my own home. But Michael had texted Dorothy while we waited, and she showed the officers the message saying he'd approved the lock change and that I was no longer welcome due to marital problems. The officers said it was a civil matter. Since Michael's name was on the deed, and he'd given permission for the lock change, they couldn't force entry. They could supervise while I collected some essential items, but that was all. The male officer even had the nerve to suggest marriage counseling, as if this was just a simple disagreement. I was allowed 15 minutes to pack. 15 minutes to gather the remnants of my life, while Dorothy supervised, making comments about how I was taking too much, how the children didn't need so many clothes for a few days. Grace and Tom watched like it was entertainment. The teenage boys were recording on their phones, and nobody stopped them. Emma and Noah begged to come with me, but Dorothy had already called Michael, putting him on speaker. He told the children that Mommy needed some time alone to think about her priorities, and they should stay with Grandma. The confusion and hurt in their eyes as I left without them was unbearable. I promised I'd see them soon, that everything would be okay, even though I had no idea how I'd make that happen. I spent the next 3 days at the Fairmont Hotel downtown, crying until I had no tears left, then crying some more. Jennifer, my lawyer, started preparing divorce papers and custody arrangements. She said I had a strong case given the financial abuse and parental alienation, but it would take time during which my children were being poisoned against me. Michael finally agreed to meet me on day 3. He showed up looking haggard, but I felt no sympathy. He tried to explain that his mother had convinced him I was being selfish with money that I could afford to support everyone, but chose not to. He actually believed I'd been hoarding wealth while his family struggled. When I started to tell him the truth about the money, he cut me off, saying he didn't want to hear my excuses. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. If they wanted to believe I was selfish, if they wanted to take everything I'd given and demand more, then I would show them what actually selfish looked like. I would cut them off completely, every last cent, and let them discover for themselves what they'd lost. Jennifer helped me close all the joint accounts that day, moving my money into accounts only I could access. I canceled every automatic transfer, every recurring payment, every credit card that anyone else had access to. I shut down the shell companies I'd used to funnel money to them. I even canceled the insurance policies I'd been secretly paying for. It was a financial massacre, 15 years of support vanishing in a single afternoon. Then I found my new home. A stunning penthouse in downtown Seattle, 28th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. 3 bedrooms, modern and clean, with a doorman and security that would never let Dorothy near me again. The rent was $8,000 a month, but for the first time in 15 years, I could afford it without worry, because I wasn't supporting 8 other adults. The first signs of panic started exactly 1 week after I'd moved into my penthouse. My phone rang at 7 in the morning on March 27th. It was Dorothy, but her voice had lost all its previous smugness. She was calling about the monthly deposit that hadn't appeared in her account. She said there must be some mistake with the disability insurance payment, and could I look into it since I was good with computers. I played dumb perfectly. "What monthly payment, Dorothy? I don't know anything about your finances. I thought Frank's insurance had been settled years ago." She stuttered, trying to explain without admitting she knew I'd been paying all along. Finally, she said it was $5,000 that came every month like clockwork, and it had just stopped. I suggested she call the insurance company directly and wished her luck before hanging up. 3 days later, Brian called. He was frantic. The loan payment for his practice hadn't gone through, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. He said the medical foundation that had been supporting him had suddenly closed his account with no explanation. I told him I was sorry to hear that, but wasn't sure why he was calling me. He hesitated, then asked if I could loan him the $50,000 he needed to catch up. I laughed and said I was going through a divorce and didn't have that kind of money available. The silence on his end was deafening. By the second week, the utility companies started cutting services. Dorothy's electricity was shut off first, then the water. She called Michael, screaming that there must be a mistake, that the bills had always been paid automatically. Michael called me, demanding to know what I'd done. I simply said I'd done nothing, which was technically true. I'd stopped doing everything, but I'd done nothing wrong. Grace and her boyfriend Tom lasted exactly 4 days without utilities before abandoning the house. They showed up at Dorothy's apartment, but she couldn't help them because she was facing her own crisis. Without the monthly payments, she couldn't afford rent, food, and Frank's medications. She had to choose, and Frank's health won out, meaning she'd be evicted within the month. The real shock came when Michael discovered the truth about our finances. He'd tried to use our joint credit card for a business dinner, and it was declined. When he called the bank, they informed him the account had been closed by the primary holder, me. He went to check our savings and found them empty. Not empty because I'd taken money that was half his, but empty because there had never been as much as he thought. The fake investment portfolios I'd shown him didn't exist. The charity donations were actually payments to his family. The truth unraveled thread by thread. He confronted his mother first, demanding to know about the mysterious payments that had stopped. Under pressure, with her world collapsing, Dorothy finally admitted she'd known all along that I was supporting them. She'd known about the mortgage payments, the medical bills, Brian's tuition, everything. She'd pretended not to know because it was embarrassing to need help from someone she despised. She'd taken my money while treating me like an outsider, convincing herself she deserved it because Michael should have married someone better. Brian's reaction was even worse. When Michael told him about my secret support, Brian admitted he'd suspected it for years. Patricia had actually figured it out and told him, but they'd decided to stay quiet and keep accepting the help. They'd even planned their pregnancies around knowing I'd pay for everything child-related. The family meeting that followed was apparently explosive, with everyone turning on each other, blaming and accusing the family unity Dorothy had always preached about crumbling in the face of financial reality. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my life with Emma and Noah. The custody arrangement Jennifer negotiated gave me the children 5 days a week, with Michael getting weekends. But after the first weekend, where they had to stay in Michael's studio apartment because the house had no utilities, they begged not to go back. The court modified the arrangement quickly when the children testified about the living conditions. Dorothy tried to salvage things by coming to my building, but the doorman, following my instructions, wouldn't let her pass the lobby. She stood there for 3 hours, calling and texting, leaving voicemails that went from angry to pleading to desperate. She even tried to send messages through Emma and Noah, but I'd had honest conversations with them about boundaries and manipulation. They were young but understood that Grandma had been unkind to Mommy and needed a time out. The extended family started learning the truth when Dorothy couldn't host Easter dinner. She'd always made a huge production of it, inviting cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone. When she had to cancel because she couldn't afford food for 20 people, questions started. The story came out in pieces, each revelation more shocking than the last. Dorothy's own sister, Grace, publicly blamed her for ruining the good thing they'd all had going. Michael's cousins reached out to me, appalled by what they'd learned. Several admitted they'd always wondered how Dorothy afforded things on a retired construction worker's pension. They'd assumed Frank had better insurance than he'd let on, or that Dorothy had inherited money. Learning it was all from me while I was being excluded from family photos and events made them reconsider every interaction from the past 15 years. Frank was the only one who responded with genuine remorse. He called me one evening, his voice rough with emotion. He said he'd suspected something wasn't right with their finances, but hadn't wanted to question good fortune. He apologized for his wife's behavior and said he was ashamed of how I'd been treated. He was filing for separation from Dorothy, moving in with his brother in Tacoma. At 71, he was starting over because he couldn't stand to look at his wife knowing what she'd done. Patricia filed for divorce from Brian within 6 weeks. Without my financial support, Brian couldn't maintain the lifestyle she'd become accustomed to. She took their 2 children and moved back to California with her parents. Brian had to sell his practice at a loss to avoid bankruptcy, ending up working as an employee at another clinic for a third of what he used to make. He blamed me in angry voicemails, saying I'd destroyed his life by taking away what was rightfully his. The entitlement was staggering. By June, Dorothy's transformation was complete. The woman who'd once held court at family gatherings, dispensing judgment and criticism, was now working as a cashier at a grocery store in Renton. She'd had to sell everything of value to pay debts, and was living in a studio apartment that was smaller than the closet in the house I'd helped her keep for 15 years. She showed up at my office one day, having somehow gotten past security by saying she was delivering lunch. She looked older, defeated, wearing a uniform polo shirt with a name tag. She broke down crying in the lobby, begging me to hear her out. Security was moving to escort her out when I agreed to give her 5 minutes in the conference room. The Dorothy who sat across from me was unrecognizable. Gone was the perfectly styled hair, the manicured nails, the designer handbag she'd always carried, likely bought with my money. She looked me in the eyes and admitted everything. She admitted to knowing about the money from the beginning. She admitted to treating me badly because she was jealous of my success. She admitted to poisoning Michael against me because she couldn't stand that her son loved someone she saw as competition. She pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper, hands shaking. It was a list she'd made of everything she could remember that I'd paid for over the years. The total was staggering even to me. She said she'd been doing the math, working double shifts, and calculated it would take her 40 years to pay back even half. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, just for a chance to try to make things right. I listened without interrupting, then stood to leave. I told her forgiveness wasn't mine to give anymore. The damage wasn't just about money, but about the years of emotional abuse, the attempted alienation of my children, and the ultimate betrayal of changing the locks on my home. I said I hoped she learned from this experience, but that our relationship was over. As security escorted her out, she called back that she would keep trying to make amends, even if I never acknowledged it. Michael and I finalized our divorce in September 2024. The settlement was surprisingly simple since there were no real assets to divide. The house had to be sold to pay off the secret second mortgage he'd taken to help his mother without telling me. His retirement account was nearly empty because he'd borrowed against it repeatedly. The only things of value were my separate accounts and my stock options, which Jennifer had ensured were protected as premarital assets and sole income investments. The mediation was brutal. Michael tried to claim I'd hidden assets and committed financial fraud by deceiving him about our situation. Jennifer destroyed that argument by presenting 15 years of bank records showing that every cent I'd claimed went to charity had actually gone to his family. The mediator actually laughed when Michael said he deserved alimony because he'd become accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Jennifer pointed out that the lifestyle he'd become accustomed to was one where his wife secretly supported his entire extended family while being emotionally abused by his mother. Michael's lawyer quit halfway through the proceedings, saying he couldn't ethically represent someone who kept changing his story. Michael had first claimed he knew nothing about the money, then admitted he'd suspected but thought it was from his mother's savings, then finally confessed he'd known for the last 5 years, but thought I could afford it. The judge was not amused by the shifting narratives. Emma and Noah chose to live with me full-time after the divorce was finalized. The court appointed a child psychologist who determined that the children had been subjected to attempted parental alienation by Dorothy and that maintaining that relationship would be harmful. Michael got supervised visitation every other weekend, which he rarely used because he was working 3 jobs to pay his debts. I threw myself into my work and my children. The promotion I'd initially won in Singapore led to even bigger opportunities. Without the constant drain on my finances and emotional energy, I excelled in ways I hadn't thought possible. I was invited to speak at conferences featured in Tech Weekly as one of the top 50 CTOs in the country and headhunted by multiple Fortune 500 companies. But the best part was the peace. No more lying about where money went. No more anxiety about keeping stories straight. No more dreading family gatherings where I'd be insulted while paying for everyone's meal. No more watching my children see their mother disrespected. Just peace, success, and the freedom to choose who deserved my generosity. In December 2024, I met Daniel at a charity gala for children's coding education. He was the CEO of an investment firm divorced with a teenage daughter. What struck me first wasn't his obvious success or his striking looks, but how he interacted with the staff at the event. He knew the servers' names, thanked everyone genuinely, and when he found out the bartender was putting herself through computer science school, he spent 20 minutes giving her career advice. Our first date was coffee that turned into lunch, that turned into walking around Pike Place Market until dinner. He asked about my work, really listened to my answers, and shared his own struggles with building boundaries with manipulative family members. When I finally told him about my situation with my ex-husband's family expecting judgment or disbelief, he simply said that my generosity had been weaponized against me, and that took tremendous strength to finally break free. Daniel met Emma and Noah after 3 months of dating. He brought his daughter Sophia, and the 4 of them bonded over building elaborate Lego sets and having heated debates about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. He never pushed for more involvement than I was comfortable with, never criticized my parenting, and always reinforced to the kids that their mom was the boss. The contrast to my previous life was stark. 1 year after that terrible March morning when I'd been locked out of my own home, I stood in my penthouse looking at a very different life. Emma had just won her school's science fair with a project about sustainable energy that she'd worked on with Daniel's daughter, Sophia. Noah had discovered a love for piano and was preparing for his first recital. My bank accounts were healthy and growing with no mysterious drains or hidden transfers. Dorothy had kept her promise to try to make amends in her own way. Every month an envelope arrived, with whatever she could spare, sometimes $20, sometimes $50. The notes inside started as long apologies, then gradually became updates about her life and Frank's health. I never responded, but I didn't return them either. Jennifer suggested I donate the money to charity, which felt like the right kind of closure. Brian had reached out once through a mutual friend asking if I'd consider investing in his attempt to start a new practice. The audacity still amazed me. He genuinely seemed to believe that, because I'd supported him before, I owed him continued help. The friend was mortified when I explained the full history and never brought it up again. Michael had descended into bitterness. He posted vague messages on social media about gold diggers and betrayal, apparently having revised history in his mind to make himself the victim. His cousins told me he'd been banned from family events after drunkenly ranting about how I'd destroyed the family. The irony of him finally being the one excluded wasn't lost on anyone. Patricia actually sent me a thank you card. She wrote that discovering the truth about Brian's financial dependence had opened her eyes to other lies in their marriage. She said watching me walk away from toxic situations had inspired her to do the same. She was back in school getting her master's in psychology, determined to build her own career instead of depending on anyone else. Frank and I developed an unexpected friendship. He would call occasionally to check on the children, always respectful of boundaries, never pushing for more than I was willing to give. He'd started volunteering at a youth center teaching kids basic construction skills, finding purpose beyond his identity as Dorothy's husband. He said watching me stand up for myself had reminded him that it's never too late to change your life. The children thrived in their new environment. Without the constant tension and subtle criticisms from Dorothy, Emma became more confident, more willing to take risks and express herself. She started coding lessons and declared she wanted to be like Mom, but even better. Noah found his voice literally and figuratively, no longer the quiet, anxious child who tried to disappear during family gatherings. Both kids went to therapy to process the divorce and the truth about their grandmother emerging stronger and more emotionally intelligent than I could have hoped. Daniel and I took things slowly, both of us carrying scars from previous relationships. But what we built was based on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and absolute honesty. He never made me feel guilty for my success or expected me to dim my light to make others comfortable. When I received an offer to become Chief Technology Officer for a major Seattle tech company with a $1 million compensation package, he celebrated with me genuinely, then helped me negotiate for even more. Looking back, those 15 years of secret support had cost me more than $2 million. But the real cost had been to my self-worth, my mental health, and my children's understanding of what love and family should look like. Dorothy had stolen years of peace from me while taking my money and giving back only criticism and contempt. The profound lesson I learned wasn't just about financial boundaries or toxic in-laws. It was about the danger of sacrificing yourself for people who don't value you. I thought I was being generous and kind, keeping the peace for Michael's sake, being the bigger person. But I was actually enabling abuse, teaching my children that love meant accepting disrespect and slowly disappearing under the weight of other people's expectations, demands. Sometimes losing everything you built for others is the only way to find what you truly deserve for yourself. I lost a husband who never defended me, an extended family that never accepted me, and the crushing weight of secrets and lies. But I gained self-respect, genuine relationships with people who valued me for who I was, and the freedom to be generous on my own terms, not as an obligation or manipulation. Dorothy was right about one thing during that awful morning when she changed the locks. It was a family home. She just never realized that she'd locked out the person who'd made that home possible. By trying to take everything from me, she'd freed me to build something so much better. And that's the ultimate irony of this story. In trying to destroy me, Dorothy had actually saved me from a life of being used, unappreciated, and unloved. Now, when I look out at the Seattle skyline from my penthouse, I don't see what I lost. I see what I gained: freedom, authenticity, and the knowledge that I am enough with or without anyone else's approval. My generosity is now reserved for people who appreciate it, my love for those who reciprocate it, and my energy for building a life where my children see their mother not as someone who endures disrespect for the sake of family, but as someone who knows her worth and accepts nothing less. After everything that happened, I want to ask you all something. Have you ever found yourself supporting people who didn't appreciate you? What was your breaking point? Please share your stories in the comments below, because I know I'm not alone in this experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to stop being everyone's financial and emotional support system. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, sometimes the best thing you can do for everyone, including yourself, is to stop doing everything for everyone else. Take care of yourselves, set those boundaries, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for knowing your worth.